stay in Belarus after the exercises like it was in winter 2022?
I have no information to share with you on that. We know that these type of exercises take place regularly, but you are asking some more specific questions concerning those exercises, and I have no new information to share at this moment.
All right. Let's see. The gentleman in the brown jacket here.
This is Mohammed with Al-Ittihad, United Arab Emirates. With the fresh Houthi attacks in the Red Sea and concerns with the re-emergence of ISIS in the region, how does NATO assess these emerging threats, and how does NATO work with its southern partners, including the UAE, to face such threats? Thank you.
Now, of course, we work together in the anti-Daesh coalition, which was hosted here the last time, I think it was in December last year. Then, of course, as NATO, we are active in Iraq, helping Iraq to build up its own armed forces and also their own Justice Department and the security forces in Iraq through the NATO mission in Iraq. And we have a close cooperation with many of our partners in the southern neighborhood. We had a very successful meeting of the North Atlantic Council with 7 ambassadors from Algeria and Egypt and other countries and Mauritania. And others only, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we follow that closely. Obviously it's outside NATO territory, but of course there is a clear interest.
All right. Gentleman here in the sweater.
Secretary-General, the President, you've been talking about Putin and about Russia. Western Balkans are again in focus. I'm Kenan Ćosić from Oslobođenje, Sarajevo. The President of Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, recently, a few days ago, met with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Given that an arrest warrant has been issued for Dodik in Bosnia and Herzegovina with an international warrant pending Interpol's decision, how does NATO view this meeting in the context of regional stability? And second question, additionally, how do you assess Dodik's stated position that police of Republika Srpska would prevent his arrest in Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, clearly it's up in the first place to the Bosnian Herzegovina presidency, the 3-member presidency, to take charge of the country. As I explained to them again when I visited now 3 weeks ago, I know some of them are somewhat irritated with the role of the High Representative, Mr. Schmid, and of course other aspects of the Dayton Agreement. But in the end, if they take control of the country, the 3 of them, then they really rule the country. And that is my urge. For NATO, I've made very clear we cannot accept a security vacuum in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We don't want any destabilization there. And of course, when it comes to Dodik, the president of Republika Srpska, and all the court orders and everything happening there, we expect him to basically accept when the independent judiciary is ruling, that he accepts that and that he then behaves accordingly.
All right. Gentleman in the 4th row here.
Gabriel Dominguez from the Japan Times newspaper in Tokyo. There'll be a meeting between the North Atlantic Council and the Indo-Pacific 4 countries tomorrow. Could you tell us what topics will be on the agenda and what new ways are being considered to deepen cooperation between NATO and these countries?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I'm really looking and also to my bilateral meeting with the Japanese foreign minister. And this is important because we cannot look at at NATO territory in isolation. We know that all these theaters, the Indo-Pacific, the Euro-Atlantic, what is happening in the Middle East, this is all getting more and more interconnected. Look at what is happening in Ukraine with North Korea, China and Iran getting more and more involved. And of course, the fact that China is rapidly building up its own armed forces, having towards 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. So what we will concentrate tomorrow on, I think, no, I expect even, is that we will deepen the cooperation. We will make it more and more and more practical. That means working together on issues like defense, industrial cooperation, exchanging experiences and views, etc. We are learning a lot now from this terrible war in Ukraine. capturing those lessons through JTAC, the Joint Analysis Center now opened in Poland, which is a joint Ukraine-NATO initiative. We have to make sure when we work with the Indo-Pacific Four partners that we capture those lessons, that we learn from them, including Australia and New Zealand, but of course also Korea and Japan. And I think that is important. And the good thing here is that it is getting from the meeting is the message more and more to content, to meat on the bone. And that's extremely important.
All right. The blonde woman in the blue dress.
Hi, Alexandra Filipenko, The Breakfast Show, originally Russia, but in exile in Lithuania. For the sake of international security, who should control Greenland?
Denmark is, of course, not controlling Greenland, but it is part of Denmark, in the sense of being part of the Kingdom of Denmark, I should say. It is an independent territory, but part of the Kingdom of Denmark. But of course, your question has to do with this whole issue of how to defend the Arctic, the high north. And this is not only Denmark through Greenland. This is also Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Canada, and the United States. 7 NATO allies, the 8th country being Russia, but the other 7 all being in NATO. And we are working more and more closely together because we know what is happening there. We know that the Chinese are making use of the sea lanes opening up. We know that the Russians are more and more arming that part of the world. We know that we have an issue, for example, a very practical issue, that we do not have enough icebreakers. It seems a detail, but it is not. It is important. And on all of this, we are working more and more closely together, NATO getting more and more involved. And I think that is very important.
All right, the gentleman in the 4th row, white shirt.
Thank you very much, Rickard Husu, Finnish national broadcaster YLE. My question is on defense spending. This week, the Finnish government announced that it will increase national defense spending to 3% by 29. What's your view on this decision? Do you expect similar pledges already before The Hague? Would it be beneficial? And additionally, Finland has also decided to withdraw from the treaty against landmines. What is the broader significance on this for NATO's defense, as also the Baltics and Poland has made similar decisions? Yeah. Thank you.
So when it comes to the Ottawa Agreement, that obviously is for individual allies to decide on, so I should not comment. I took note of that, but I'm extremely happy, of course, with the extra spending Finland has pledged. I think even if you figure in the cost of conscription in Finland, it brings you up to 3.5% by 2029, if I'm correctly informed. So it is really a surge, and we see this all over NATO now. Look what Germany is doing, opening up $500 billion extra in defense spending. The Europeans coming up with 800 billion extra. Finland, indeed, but also the announcements by Denmark, by Sweden, by the Czech Republic, by so many others. I mean, I'm now forgetting probably 1 or 2, so sorry for that. But also that many countries who are not yet at 2% are more and more getting to a place where they want to commit to 2%, potentially even before the summit in The Hague. All these rumors are now floating around. And I think this is really a surge. Already we have seen defense spending on aggregate since 2017 in Canada and the European part of NATO going up by 700 billion. But the last couple of months, the numbers coming in is really staggering. It is impressive, and it is needed because we have this Russian threat, we have the Chinese build-up, we have this connection with North Korea and Iran, so we have to defend ourselves, and we can defend ourselves now. But if this surge would not have happened, and hopefully will continue to happen, we could not defend ourselves in 5 years, and that is why this is so much needed.
Thanks. Terry.
Back here, sorry.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Terry Schultz with NPR today. I was touched that you began the press conference by mentioning Bucha. And your predecessor visited Bucha and said that what happened there was basically an unspeakable crime and that those responsible should be brought to justice. Since then, the U.S., which was contributing personnel and funding to investigations into Russian war crimes, alleged Russian war crimes like in Bucha, they've withdrawn that funding and that personnel. What is your position on that? Do you also believe that those responsible for these atrocities must be brought to justice, that there must be accountability for these crimes to have a Europe that is stable in the future, that these cannot be these crimes must be accounted for? And would you like to see the U.S. continue supporting that effort?
Well, obviously, those who are responsible for Bucha and for so many other crimes have to be brought to justice, yes. But when it comes to the other part of the question, our focus now has to be on making sure that we can end this war in a way that Putin will never, ever try again to capture 1 square mile or kilometer of Ukraine or of a part of NATO territory. And that a ceasefire / a peace deal in Ukraine will be lasting, will be enduring. That has to be our main focus at the moment. So I'm not going to comment on every policy decision within every ally every day. That's impossible for me. But your general question, absolutely yes, we have to bring those responsible to justice. And we have to really focus on making sure that this war ends in a way that, again, as I said, it will never happen again.
All right, and just behind Terry, Max.
Thanks a lot, Secretary General. Donald Trump is about to announce tariffs that will hit both foe and friend of the US. I don't want you to comment specifically on the tariffs that are coming, but are you afraid that this sort of trade war that it could spark will have an impact and undermine the alliance?
Well, you know, the alliance is laser focused on making sure that we can defend our NATO territory. And there are increasing threats from the Russians, from others. That's what we are focusing on. And that means that when it comes to fiscal policy, when it comes to, for example, this whole issue of imposing of tariffs, this is really a matter for national governments. And you rightly assumed that I was not going to comment.
All right, down here in the center, third row.
Hi.
Hi.
Mr. Secretary General, I wanted to ask about Moldova. So recently, 3 Russian diplomats were expelled from Chisinau after it was demonstrated the involvement of the Russian Federation embassy in the transportation of a convicted Moldovan member of the parliament to the Transnistrian region. And in reply, Russia says that serious consequences will follow. And Moldova has parliamentary elections soon, and as we all know, Moldova is also a target of cyber attacks. So can we expect an evolution of relations between Moldova and NATO in order to protect Moldova from the foreign interferences? Thank you.
We have a strong cooperation with Moldova, with Chisinau, with President Sandu. She visited me in December. We know each other very well, this role, but also in my previous job in the Netherlands, we worked very well together. And obviously, wherever we can help, and we do a lot together, but whatever we can do more of, we will do so. It's not always wise for me to tell you everything, keep our enemies a bit guessing, but you can be assured there is a close cooperation.
All right, and just behind her, the gentleman in the fourth row. Yes.
Thank you for the floor. Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Secretary General, Russia officially denied the US proposals for ceasefire in Ukraine, saying that it does not meet the core Russian demands. But we all remember that the core Russian demands are just withdrawal of NATO troops to the borders of 1997. Why, just curious, what kind of response could we hear from NATO side? Thank you.
But listen, you will hear many crazy things coming out of Putin and out of Russia, including their demands for a peace deal and whatever. I would not take it all too seriously. Of course, we have to look into it always and have to react to it, but I mean, this is also how he tries to negotiate. And I am, as I said, I commend President Trump for breaking the deadlock, for getting the discussion going, for getting this initial 30-day ceasefire on the energy infrastructure, steps taken on the Black Sea. Of course, we hope for more. I know that the American administration is working day and night to get it done. We are getting updates, being informed, etc. And then it is important on the European side that countries like the UK and France are thinking about the situation post a ceasefire / a peace deal. You know, if I would comment on every media outing of Putin, particularly when it comes to what the Americans try to establish in terms of a ceasefire and a peace deal, is not helpful. You will hear many strange things coming out of Moscow.
All right, the woman just 2 away from, yes.
The woman is Alexandra von Namen with DW.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hey. Yesterday, Serbia and NATO ally Hungary signed a new defense cooperation agreement. Was the NATO alliance consulted beforehand? Do you condone it, given the situation in the region and Serbia's ties with Russia? Thank you.
Well, we see in the region, of course, more of these bilateral, trilateral agreements. We have also Albania with Kosovo and Croatia, and of course we have and then this one is coming up. I mean, this is outside. NATO is not party to this, so this is not concerning the alliance.
All right, the woman in the third row in the black.
My name is Nastasia Mikhailova. I am from the Insider, Russian media in exile. And you told sometimes yesterday that the war should be end, but how it could be end now? And what do you think about Russian threats for European Union? And do you have a plan about rearm? Thank you.
Well, of course, the best way to end the war is for the Russians to leave Ukraine, and then it can end very soon. But that is not going to happen, I'm afraid. So that's why it's good that the Americans have now started this process. And that was important because somebody had to break the deadlock. And I always assumed if President Trump would be elected that he would try to do so, and he has done so. And I think that is good. And we completely support those efforts. And we have to take it from here. And we have to make sure that whatever happens, that when there is a deal ultimately struck and or a sustainable ceasefire is ultimately organized, that it has to be clear to the Russians that they cannot do this again, that this has got to stop. That's why it has to be durable, it has to be lasting, and this is exactly what the Americans are aiming for, what we all are aiming for, including making sure that the whole of NATO territory stays safe.
All right, the woman in the front here.
It's Nita Dobroshi from Koha, Kosovo. During your recent visit to Kosovo, you mentioned the possibility that NATO's potential engagement in Ukraine could lead to discussions about its presence in Balkans. Given the region's fragile situation, security situation, highlighted by attacks in KFOR troops in 2023 and Banska and Iberlipen's attacks 1 year later, approximately, what implications could this have to regional security in general and for Kosovo in particular?
I'm not sure I made a connection between Ukraine and a potential peace deal on Ukraine and then potentially security guarantees being needed for Ukraine. We know there are initiatives now being developed by European allies like the French and the Brits are doing with others. And I did not connect that to the situation in Kosovo because I think KFOR is important. EUFOR, the EU force in Bosnia and Herzegovina, is important. We work closely together. I think the security situation in Kosovo is very close to our heart. We have to make sure that the situation since 1999, now much more stable, can continue. And when it comes to, indeed, Banska and also the attack on NATO forces, both in 2023, that the Serbs will work on the accountability. This is what I discussed with President Vučić on the phone, but also when we had dinner here in Brussels 2 weeks ago.
All right, the woman in the green sweater.
Thank you. Bin Na-chung from Yonhap News Agency, South Korea.
Hi.
I'm sure you are aware of the political situation in South Korea, so I have two questions. Why do you think it's still crucial to have cooperation with South Korea? And secondly, actually, we were waiting for the impeachment ruling this week. So my question would be, will you be sending invitation to South Korea, whoever the leader is then, regardless of the outcome of this week's ruling? Thank you.
Well, of course, the judicial process within the Republic of Korea is very much to the Republic of Korea. I can only respect whatever outcome there will be. I'm happy that the foreign minister is visiting this foreign ministers meeting. I will have a meeting with him in half an hour. I'm looking forward to that bilateral meeting. And then, of course, he will participate tomorrow in the foreign ministers meeting. And when it comes to The Hague and the summit and the choreography, we still have to take final decisions on that. So no news on that, but that is not about Korea. That is more generally how we will engage, yes or no, and in what format with our partners.
And the row just in front of her, the woman with the glasses.
Thank you. Kim McCrail from the Wall Street Journal, and I'm sorry to hide behind the cameras. The position of the Supreme Allied Commander Europe is traditionally held by an American. There have been some reports, though, that the U.S. is considering giving that position up. I'm wondering if that happens, what would that mean for NATO? And what would that mean for the U.S.'s influence in NATO?
Well, these are what-if questions. And I've seen, other than some of these rumors and reports indeed in your newspaper, I've not seen any concrete proposals on this. So I don't want to react on what-if questions. Chris Cavoli being the EUCOM commander, the commander of US forces here in Europe, but also being the Supreme Allied Commander. That is a tradition we have since the start of NATO, since Eisenhower, for good reasons. But let me not comment on what-if questions.
All right, the woman standing.
Thank you. I'm Ezatus from Tunisia. I really would like to notice that there is a group of Arab journalists from the Middle East and North Africa within this group. Secretary General, I really appreciate your comments on Ukraine. You said that you want to pursue the war criminals in justice, and your positive message to Ukrainian people was because of the Russian aggression. Knowing that, tomorrow, Gaza might be on the agenda. So are you concerned about the situation in Gaza? Is there any single step to stop the bloodshed, to save children in Gaza, to stop the killing, the daily killing, and the starvation of people there under the eyes of the world? Thank you.
Of course, we are following the situation in the Middle East, and particularly in Gaza and Lebanon. And your question is very much to Gaza. We follow that very closely. At the same time, this is a question which is really being addressed at the level of the individual allies. They are navigating the crisis, so there's no role for NATO here. When it comes to NATO and a close cooperation with the southern neighborhood, including with Tunisia and other countries, Algeria and Morocco and Mauritania and Egypt and Israel and others, this is about security cooperation. How can we help each other? How can some, like in Mauritania or and so, by the way, Jordan, a very important partner there, like we're doing in Iraq. How can NATO help to make sure that we apply our knowledge to help these countries to build up their own armed forces, their own security forces, etc. But when it comes to Gaza itself and the situation there, it's up to individual allies to navigate that situation.
All right, I know that we'll have more questions than we have time to answer, but we do have a few more minutes. So let's come to the woman in blue here on the aisle.
Hi, good afternoon. Isabel Schäfers, German TV, ZDF. I have a question on defense spending. We know that Donald Trump wants 5%, but only for the allies, not for the US. On this special topic, but also more general, do the European allies need to do basically everything that the US requests now in order to keep the US within NATO?
Well, first of all, as I said, let's celebrate the fact that we have added in aggregate by now several hundred billion since 2017, and that the last couple of months, including your country, I mean, you guys are leading the way, the Germans, the $500 billion extra in defense spending is staggering. What we will have to do in the run-up to The Hague is to assess, and this is a process we have in place in NATO, the defense planning process. We have to assess exactly what are the targets we need to achieve. Based on those targets, which gaps do we have? We have already identified a few. For example, the fact that we need more long-range capabilities, that we need more air defenses, that when it comes to our land forces, our armies, we need to invest more there. Including in the way they are outfitted, etc. So on all these issues, and logistics, and command and control, etc. So there will, when you look at the aggregate number, and it is not finalized yet, we will finalize that whole process early June with the defense ministers, you can assume that, as I said before, that you will have to spend considerably north of 3%, to reach these targets, to close the gaps, to make sure that we can keep ourselves safe in this part of Europe. And that is driving us at the moment. But whilst we are working on those targets, we see these staggering amounts of money coming in. And that is important. That means that Europeans are stepping up. And that's crucial because of the threats from Russia and the increasing threats from China, but also Iran and North Korea.
All right, staying in the same row, the woman in green.
Hi, I'm here.
Sorry, yeah.
Hi, goedemiddag. Lise Hesselund from Danish TV2. I would like to return to the question regarding Greenland.
Yes.
I hear your point on the necessity to have a larger presence in the Arctic, but we have a situation where one NATO ally is threatening another NATO ally with taking control of its territory. So my question is, why won't you go into that discussion? Why is that? And also, isn't there a credibility problem here when we have this situation, we have these threats, and you won't distance yourself as Secretary-General to these threats? Normally, we also hear similar things coming out of Russia, but why don't you want to go into this specific debate? Thank you.
Because what I want to do is to have us focus on the issue at hand. And the issue at hand here is the defense of the Arctic, and that is much broader than Greenland. Of course, Greenland is part of the Arctic, but as I said, Denmark, through Greenland, is one of the 7 countries, the US itself, Canada, Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden, they are all part of the High North, and we have some serious issues to address. With the Chinese using the sea lanes, with the Russians rearming the region. And I want us to concentrate on that issue and be very much focused on this, because there is a real issue there, which goes really beyond Greenland, it's only Greenland. Of course, Greenland being important, but it is in conjunction with the other 6.
All right, I think we've got time perhaps for one more. The gentleman here in the front.
2 more. Yes.
Darko Čačić, Beta News Agency from Serbia. Secretary General, you said that NATO is not part of bilateral agreements in the Balkans, but can you tell how does NATO view the recent agreement between Croatia, Albania and Kosovo, which has sparked strong reactions from Serbia, particularly President Vučić President Vučić's claim that it means opening an arms race in the Balkans. Given that Croatia and Albania are NATO member states, what implications does that agreement have on regional security and stability?
Well, of course, the stability and the situation in the Western Balkans is very much a concern. That is why NATO is present in both Kosovo and also in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And of course, we have 5 allies, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Albania, Croatia and Slovenia on the Western Balkans. And we are working very closely together. But please understand that for me as Secretary General, I should refrain a little bit from commenting on every development in every part of the world, including on the Western Balkans. This is really for individual allies to decide. There are many more of these bilateral and trilateral agreements between allies. I know that, for example, the Netherlands and Belgium are working together on many issues. And of course, that is different from what you are addressing here. I know, and you are addressing an important subject, but still, I think I should not comment myself.
All right, you said one final question? All right, one final question. Gentleman in the blue here.
With the glasses. No.
Thank you.
No, and then the guy with
no. Okay. Thank you.
You're the boss.
Thank you. Barzan, reporter from Kurdistan 24. The mission of a global coalition force in Iraq to end by 2026, next year. You are, as a NATO, are you going to end as well, or you are going to stay, like the training forces? And the second question, back to February, during the mission conference in Germany, you have had a meeting with the president of the Iraqi Kurdistan region. Could you tell us something about that meeting? Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very positive meeting. We know each other very well in my previous role, and it is important, I think, to continue that conversation. So I was very happy to have that opportunity in Munich. Of course, I cannot disclose what we discussed in detail, but it was a very cordial meeting, re-establishing our relationship. And when it comes to Iraq, of course, we are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government, helping Iraq to develop its armed forces and develop its security forces. Of course, when there are changes to the overall security infrastructure, because, for example, the Americans potentially taking down some of their troop levels there because the discussions they have with Iraq, that could have an implication for the NATO mission in Iraq, and then we will navigate that with the Iraqi authorities. So you can be assured that we will always be in front of that.
All right, and then very final question to the gentleman in the glasses and the blue shirt.
Yes, thank you very much. Michel Kerris, NRC Amsterdam.
And now you have to ask a nice question.
That's a nice question, okay. Okay. So, there was quite a few issues have raised considerable concern about the cohesion in NATO. Think about Greenland, think about the direct contacts between the US and Russia without Europe being present. How would you characterize the atmosphere in your house at this moment?
Well, as I said last week in Warsaw, I know there has been some tough language. I know that there have been allies, for example, on this side of the pond, being worried about the long-term commitment of the US to NATO. And I was in the White House, but before I went to the White House, we had President Macron there and Prime Minister Starmer. And on so many other occasions, the Americans have stated again and again, we are committed to NATO, we are committed to Article 5. This commitment comes with a clear expectation, the expectation that on this side of the Atlantic and Canada, we will spend more, commit that we will really deliver on the 2%, and then move upwards because of these gaps we still have in this part of NATO to deliver on all the targets. And that's the process we are in the middle of. And in the meantime, the hundreds of billions are rolling in as we speak. And that will continue, no doubt, over the coming days and weeks is my expectation. And we have to do this because of the Russian threat and because of the increasing China threat. So let's not be naive about that. But I'm absolutely convinced this alliance is there to stay with the US. Their commitment is absolutely clear. We want to do more together in the Pacific even, and we want to work on many issues, including in the Arctic, and I think that is also positive.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. We'll be back on Friday afternoon, so if we didn't hear from you today, hopefully we'll get you in then. Thank you so much.
Great, see you later this week.
the stability rule and actually the investment rule 2 years early, which I think should give us some confidence.
Okay, thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you.
One of the challenges we've been puzzling over is the headroom points that Mr. Dean has raised, and obviously we're going to get onto the details of the welfare changes, but annually managed expenditure is an easier budget to manage in year, obviously for the obvious reasons. Is there, if headroom were to be wiped out, does that mean there's more risks to that budget than any other, given that the spending review would have taken place in the autumn? No, we can't. Obviously, not expecting you to make a budget announcement here, but realistically, that is the budget that's flexible.
I would just say that the risks around the forecast, there are upside and downside.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking, we're on a day when tariffs are going to be announced. Well, we've already had the tariffs announced in the UK. There's big tariff announcements expected. You know, as the OBR's indicated, that's a big impact. We know that I mean, there are lots of shocks that every government has to deal with. This is a particular one right now, and it's a particularly big one. But there is that risk, isn't there? I mean, annually managed, once you've done a spending review, you've got very little, and you've talked about taxes. You've talked about the spending review. There isn't much else, nowhere else you can go to get changes.
No, but we're not just passive as a government, waiting for things to happen. We also have an agenda to grow the economy, and since the budget, we have introduced the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which has successfully got through its second reading. That's legislation.
But I mean, I don't think anyone around the table would disagree with growing the economy. I don't think everyone would ever.
No, but what I'm saying, Chair, is that the Office of Budget Responsibility have already scored the National Policy Planning Framework. That's a small part of the growth reforms that we are bringing forward as a government. They haven't scored, rightly so, anything to do with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, because at the stage of the forecast, it's still a bill. It's still a bill at the moment.
Not the Employment Rights Bill, to be fair.
No, indeed, and the Employment Rights Bill will put more money in people's pockets, so there are upsides and downsides there as well. But, you know, there are things, the government are not passive. We are doing a number of things, a capital markets reform, which I think everybody in this room recognises, because, you know, some of it draws on what the previous government did, but will be good for our economy in keeping businesses and keeping jobs in Britain. The Planning and Infrastructure Bill will make it easier to build in Britain. Some people don't like that, but this government are pursuing those policies because it can help grow the economy and bring in the money to the public finances. So, of course, there are risks on the downside, and we can just focus on those, but actually, as a government, we're also focusing on doing those things that will actually grow the economy and improve our public finances at the same time.
An optimistic response. Thanks very much, Chancellor. John Grady.
Thank you very much, Meg, and good afternoon, Chancellor. If we look at chart 7.2 on page 144 of the OBR's report, obviously there's a missing Chancellor of the Exchequer there in the form of quasi-Kwarteng, but you inherited a fairly...
It'd be nice to block him out.
Well, I'm afraid we can't, but we inherited a fairly small headroom. If you moved rapidly to increase the headroom, as opposed to taking the trade-offs that you have taken, what would that mean for tax rises in our already stretched public services? I'm mindful that there's a vote, so I suspect Dame Meg would like us both to be quick.
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, if we go back to the £30 billion of headroom, that would require £20 billion of tax increases. Actually, it would probably require more than £20 billion of tax increases, because if you do £20 billion of tax increases, the OBR may well assume that the economy therefore weakens, so you'd need to do even more than that. Or you would need to reverse the extra money that we've put into the NHS since the general election, the £25 billion that we put in. And as a result, the waiting lists, well, I'm afraid in Scotland actually waiting lists aren't coming down, but that's the fault of the SNP rather than this government. But we wouldn't see the falls in the hospital waiting lists. So, you know, I think we have got the balance right. I do accept that, you know, it is lower headroom than we had in, you know, the earlier years of the OBR, but to rebuild it that rapidly would require changes on tax and on spending that, as a government, we would not be willing to make.
Now, another suggestion that people make, Chancellor, is we should increase borrowing. In your view, would a material increase in borrowing and a change in your fiscal rules, which would have to take place, lead to a significant increase in the cost of government borrowing?
Well, there have been numerous impacts if we increase borrowing. and weren't able to deliver the economic and fiscal stability. And the first would mean that the national debt, which is already almost the size of our economy, would grow larger still, and that would increase the servicing costs of that debt, which are already £105.3 billion, I think, this year, more than we spend on the Home Office, MOJ and Defence. I would rather spend some of that £105 billion on schools and hospitals, on transport infrastructure, or indeed bringing taxes down on working people. So I do want to reduce those debt servicing costs. But also, if we were to fail to meet our fiscal rules, fail to provide the economic stability that our country needs, I don't think the Bank of England would have the same confidence to cut interest rates that they have the last few months. Interest rates down 3 times in just 9 months, and that would mean higher borrowing costs for all of our constituents, whether those are families with mortgages or businesses borrowing to grow their business. So, I want to bring down the levels of borrowing. I want to bring down the levels of debt, and that's what the OBR confirmed that we are doing as a government.
Okay, and so if we're out in Bramley or Broomhouse in my seat, what you'd say is higher mortgage rates for people, higher cost of finance for big investments in energy infrastructure and so on, and lower economic growth. That's what would eventuate from greater
And I think that, constituents of yours in Glasgow and mine in Leeds West and Pudsey, actually don't need the OBR or their MP to tell them that, because it's what happened a few years ago, where the cost of borrowing for businesses and families went through the roof. Uncertainty was all around us, and it constrained the ability of our economy to grow. We've returned stability to the economy. That is the platform on which we can grow the economy.
Now, another lever that's suggested is tax. So, first suggestion is a wealth tax, which would take time and obviously be complicated to implement. What's the Treasury's thoughts on a wealth tax at the minute?
I'd just say on that, in the budget last year, we increased sort of 2 sort of broad types of tax. We increased national insurance on business, which we've already discussed. We also increased taxes on the most wealthy. The reforms to the non-dom tax status will bring in £12 billion during the course of this Parliament. VAT on private schools would bring in £9 billion during the course of this Parliament. The energy profits levy on the large profits, the energy companies making £2.3 billion. The higher rate additional dwelling on stamp duty, land tax, £1.2 billion. And the thing that these sort of taxes are the capital gains tax increase, £8.9 billion. Inheritance tax changes about just over £5 billion. The point is these taxes, by their nature, fall on more wealthy people. And so my argument would be that we did already increase significantly taxes on the wealthiest in the budget last year. Now the focus has got to be on growing the economy and reform of public services, as well as spending wisely the additional investment, including the £25 billion into the NHS in this Parliament.
And another tax suggestion people make is on council tax and revaluation or additional bans. See that from the IFS and others. What are the current Treasury thinking on that?
Well, look, some councils wanted to significantly increase their council tax this month, and we have resisted calls from a number of councils, including Windsor and Maidenhead and Slough, who wanted to increase their council tax significantly, because we do recognise the ongoing pressures on living standards and the cost of living crisis that people have gone through. So, we want taxes on working people to be as low as possible. It's why, despite the difficult decisions in the budget last year, working people in their pay slips won't be paying any additional tax.
And any thoughts on more fundamental reform, or is that for another day?
That's not something that we're looking at the moment.
And final question from me. The real way out of this is economic growth, is it not? And that's what we need much, much more of. Are you satisfied that the regulators and others in Britain are moving fast enough to deregulate to get that growth that we need, or are you wanting greater and faster progress?
I think that all the officials in the Treasury and me know that I want to go further and faster on pretty much everything we're doing, including on the regulation agenda. And we've taken out 2 regulators already. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is abolishing the biggest quangle in the world, NHS England, and we've set that target of a 25% reduction in the admin costs of regulation during the course of this Parliament. We are also trying to streamline, and Steve Reed at DEFRA is leading this work on the environmental regulations which hold up so much of the investment in infrastructure, particularly in housing, that we need to see. So look, it's right that we have regulations to protect citizens, to protect consumers, but I do think that the balance has shifted too far, and regulation now too often stops things from happening rather than enabling things to happen. If we want to build the homes, if we want the energy security, particularly in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if we want better transport links without the excessive costs, for example, that we saw with HS2, then we need to make it easier to build, and we need to reform the regulatory system. And that's what the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is setting out to do. It's also what our drive on regulation is determined to do.
Okay, thank you, Chancellor, and thank you, Dame Meg.
Thank you very much, Mr Grady. I think it's Rachel Blake MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chancellor, that was a nice segue into talking more about policy measures. So I wanted to ask some questions about house building and the forecast.
Yeah.
So we had some fascinating evidence yesterday from Professor Miles from the OBR, where I pushed him on his methodology for the forecast, the 0.2% growth, and also the number of homes he anticipates. He said he spoke to the sector. He said he did some work on land capacity and also looked at construction capacity.
Yeah.
And what came across from his evidence was that construction sector capacity would really be the rate limiting factor. So how concerned are you about the ability for workforce to step up to meet these objectives?
Yeah, look, I absolutely accept those constraints, which is why with Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, we announced this increase in the number of places on construction courses, a combination of apprenticeships, boot camps, the technical excellence colleges, and also the incentives for people wanting to move into the FE sector to train up the next generation of plumbers and electricians and bricklayers, etc. So we are very focused on that. It's also why we've relaxed some of the requirements for apprenticeship programs to actually get people through these courses, which is what the construction industry has been crying out for.
And do you anticipate the construction sector being able to step into that space, given that we've still got some time to wait to see the developments come forward?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we brought forward from the spending review the £2 billion extra for affordable homes programme is because we know that the construction sector, house building sector, wants some stability and some certainty that they can do deals and make commitments around building. So, not living hand to mouth, one deal to the next, knowing that they can plan over a period of time, which is why we're doing a 3-year spending review for day-to-day spending and slightly longer for capital spending, and why we pre-announced some of the money for the Affordable Homes programme to make sure that those projects have the confidence to continue. And that pipeline of projects, which is so important, and that consistency of funding is something that gives the industry confidence to take on apprentices and train people up. It's also something that gives people confidence to enrol on those courses, knowing that there's going to be a pipeline of work there and that their qualification is going to mean meaningful work, paying a decent wage for years to come.
Thanks. And in the discussion yesterday, we talked about further measures that they might score. So we discussed development corporations within Planning and Infrastructure Bill.
Yes.
They've obviously given the target that they said that they think that the target will only be 1.3 million. So what more needs to be done in order to make sure that that target is met, given the outline of what they think means that we won't meet the target at the moment?
Yes, so they now forecast that the house building would be at its highest level for 40 years. That is very welcome. But going back to sort of further and faster mantra, we want to do more to get those houses built. In your constituency, cities in London and Westminster, I try to imagine what the average house price is. So we do need to build more homes, particularly in parts of the country that are growing rapidly and where the housing demand is greatest. So so that's why we are doing more through the planning and infrastructure bill. That's also why we are doing more to train people up, because, as I said, I think in answer to a previous question, it's not just the homes, important as they are, both social affordable homes and homes to buy in the private sector. It's also creating really good jobs, particularly for our young people, and we want to achieve both of those through our planning reforms.
Thank you, Chancellor. There was one more element that we discussed with Professor Miles, which was about the factors of rents and the cost of rent, particularly in London, and how that could be factored into our house building process. And one of the questions that I wanted to put to him was about the impact of more affordable housing and what that could do to forecast. What consideration have you given to the chances of changes in those growth forecasts once a determination has been made about the tenure of those homes?
It would obviously be helpful for people's living standards if a lower proportion of their wages were spent on rents. It would also have quite a big fiscal impact on councils. So you gave me the number recently that your local authority spends £95 million on temporary accommodation. You know, if we were actually building the social and affordable homes that our country needs and councils like Westminster need, then we could reduce those sorts of costs of failure, give people more secure accommodation, which is good for them and their family and for all of their life chances, whilst also easing some of the pressure on public finances, in this case of local authority finances, which are under huge pressure.
Thank you very much,
Siobhan McDonagh.
Thank you. Really, the house building programme and the planning reforms have brought a bit of hope and optimism in quite a difficult set of circumstances in the OBR report. But can I urge you to go faster, Chancellor?
Yes.
Because I was delighted to hear from the Prime Minister in the run-up to the general election that you were tackling the issue of building on the green belt. But I think there's much further to go. And I wondered if you've looked at the suggestions that there is about 1 million homes that could be built close to outer London train stations, which would not only give you more growth, greater growth, homes in places where people wanted to live, and I want to give you my word of the day, it would give obviously London greater agglomeration, and so would assist you in other ways in seeing jobs with better salaries and people with more spending power, and would be greener because people would be travelling less far. They wouldn't be going to Reading quite as much.
What a shame.
Yes, which would be a shame in itself. But it would allow people to live closer to where they work, spend less on transport costs, and it seems a win-win all round. So I'm just very keen that maybe you could persuade your colleagues in housing and local government to go that bit further.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that question.
The Chancellor promises another department, doesn't he? She's still got to fund it.
So on the issue around the green belt, you know, we are very keen on those sort of areas that we call grey belt to have more development. We're also in the next few months going to announce the outcome of the review that the Deputy Prime Minister commissioned on new towns, a number of suggestions or proposals have come forward for brand new towns, but also the expansion of existing towns and cities. So there's massive opportunities there to build, whole new places for people to live. We're also doing a huge piece of work around the Oxford-Cambridge corridor with new housing, exactly as you say, alongside the train stations on that route, because we need to make sure that people then can access the good jobs paying decent wages. And your point around building around train stations is really, really important. And we are working very closely with Network Rail. We've come to an agreement with Network Rail about releasing land near train stations for exactly this purpose. And I was with Mayor Andy Burnham recently at Stockport, where they used a Merrill Development Corporation to unlock land, some of it Network Rail, some of it private, some of it local authority, around the train station to build new homes. It's just 8 minutes on the train to Manchester city centre. Obviously the rent and the house prices, the flat prices are a lot lower, but you have that access to the good jobs in the city centre, and exactly that point you're making around agglomeration. And we can achieve that in other cities as well, including London, including in my own city of Leeds, and you can have sustainable travel into work. You don't have such a need to build new infrastructure, which is obviously an expensive part of any new development, if the infrastructure, particularly the transport infrastructure, is already there.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Can I ask another question?
Briefly.
Thank you. You know, the 2 billion identified for socially owned home was gratefully received, but it will build only 18,000. That'll be of enormous impact to the 18,000 families who have that opportunity, but still it's only a tiny number in comparison to those that we need. And social housing obtained through planning gain is one of the most expensive ways in the world to get your social homes. Have you thought about any broader ideas how we can increase the amount of affordable homes?
So that £2 billion is sort of a down payment on the spending review. We wanted to announce it early, not because that's the total sum of the money we're going to make available in the spending review, but because, as I said to Rachel Blake, we wanted to give the sector certainty that the money was going to be there into the new financial year, and we're going to set out a new programme at the spending review. But look, I know that you've got strong ideas in this area, and you should definitely feed them through to myself and also to MHCLG, both Matthew Pennycook and also the Deputy Prime Minister.
With our sister committee, we'll be examining that in due course. Moving swiftly on to Bobby Dean MP.
Yeah, I'm moving on to the welfare reforms, but I'd like to ask just a clarifying question about timelines first. I'm not sure if it's Ms Tinsley or Mr McFarlane might be able to help me with this, about the dates that the OBR say that they received the packages from the Treasury. So we've got, I think, 5th of March, 12th of March was the final package, and then 19th of March was the final package. Could you tell us at what point the welfare reforms, as the package we've seen them are now, were given to the OBR?
Yeah,
so I wasn't sure who the best person
I
to
can
answer
start,
was.
and Ms Tinsley will take over on some of the detail of this. So those are the dates when we submitted, iterative packages to the OBR, which I think they talked to you about yesterday, and I think they've set out in their forecast timetable. I think the point, as you've referred to as the final package, which Ms Tinsley might want to expand on, is there were changes made to the parameters of some of the policies at that point, but the parameters of the policy still consistent with the Green Paper and still consistent with the kind of basic policies sent on the prior date in terms of the kind of final package announced by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Albeit that was after the OBR's sort of final deadline for costing certification, hence they've set out in their executive summary that two measures that were changed, the parameters were changed, were not certified, as I talked about earlier. But Louise may want to add.
Thank you. So I would add that it is the usual process that it is an iterative process. Yeah. So there are deadlines by which there are submissions made, but conversations between Treasury, the OBR, and in this case the Department of Work and Pensions were ongoing as they were sort of challenging costings or challenging assumptions. So although those deadlines are the specific deadlines, there are points at which things are submitted, and then conversations will continue as is part of the usual iterative process.
Yeah, I think the bit we're trying to get clarity on is obviously Secretary of State for Department of Work and Pensions, I think, addressed the House on the 18th of March. And so the changes that went into the package on 19th of March, was that when the variance from what she said at the dispatch box to what we saw in the spring statement came in, or?
What she said in her statement was not contradicted by anything that was given to the Office of Budget Responsibility. So, it
was within the parameters.
Yeah, it was consistent both with the Green Paper and the Secretary of State's statement to the House of Commons.
Okay. Well, let's go on to the substance of it. So, when we were talking to the economists yesterday, they seemed to sort of come to the conclusion that the welfare reforms were driven by a desire to balance the books more than get people into work. Now, I know that's not what the government's view is, that it is about getting people into work. But their view was that while they accept there's issues with the welfare state that needs reform, and that there will be plenty of people that do need that help to get into work, They don't think it's anything like the numbers of people that stand to lose out from these reforms. So just would first of all, Chancellor, like to get your response to that.
So I don't think anyone thinks that the current system of welfare, and particularly around sickness and disability benefits, is actually working today. Not working for the people in receipt of those benefits, not working in terms of ensuring we've got a decent participation rate in the economy, and not working in terms of delivering value for money for taxpayers. 1 in 10 people now on sickness and disability benefits. We've got 1 in 8 young people not in education, employment or training. We've got 1,000 people every day going on to personal independence payments. We're one of the few countries that has a lower participation rate in the labour market than we did before the pandemic. And I guess I sort of have 3 basic principles when it comes to welfare. First of all, there must always be support for those who most need it. The welfare state must always be there for them. Second, we need a welfare system that incentivises and encourages everybody who can work to work. And third, we need a system that is sustainable for the long term. And at the moment, I don't think that the welfare state does any of those 3 things well enough, which is why we are reforming it to make it work for all of those people, but particularly with a focus on helping people back to work, which is why we've announced I think possibly the biggest ever package of measures to help people back into work with guaranteed, personalised and tailored support for them.
So I think there is consensus on that. Change does need to happen. But I guess it's the timing and the scale that people are questioning. You commissioned Sir Charlie Mayfield to do a review into this. The spring statement measures come ahead of that. So that feels, I'm sure you'll come to address that. And also the main driver of the saving seems to be restricting eligibility for PIP, personal independence payments. Now, 800,000 people could be set to lose out from that. Around a third of all PIP claimants are in work anyway, but presumably if you're going to be tightening eligibility for PIP, that's going to target the sorts of people that are more ready for work already. So it doesn't seem like there's a huge proportion of people that are going to get back into work as a result of that measure. So could you explain that for us, please?
Yeah, first of all, the work that Charlie Mayfield's doing, really important work, is about helping keep people in the labour market rather than supporting people who are not in the labour market. So they're sort of a bit different, but Charlie Mayfield's doing a really important piece of work for us, and we do know that the best thing we can do is to help people stay in work, because once they drop out, it is much harder to get people back into work, which is why I've asked Charlie to do that piece of work for us. You're right that the reforms around PIP are around the eligibility, so you'll need to get a minimum of 4 points in one category to get onto personal independence payments. Since the pandemic, the cost of health and disability benefits has gone up by £20 billion. And left unchecked, by the end of this Parliament, it will be another £20 billion a year on sickness and disability benefits. The changes we're making will still see the amount spent on these benefits rise substantially by £16 billion, so a little bit less than the rise that's already in
the
place.
stated purpose of reforms is to get more people back into work.
Yeah.
Many PIP claimants are already in work, and others probably are unable to work permanently. So of the 800,000 that look like they're set to lose out on PIP claimants going forward, saved by the bell. Can I complete the question? Yeah, so the 800,000 that are set to lose out, what proportion of those would you expect to get back into work?
Well,
and I think we'll actually have to pause for the vote.
You've got a lot of time to think about the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Order. We will return as soon as we can, and I think if I propose that when we get going again, once we've got Ms Yang, Mr Dean and Ms McAvoy and myself in the room, so and I think the Chancellor